Chapter 5. A Threat. Danny and the girls moved away from Crocodile Island. All of them watched anxiously to see if they were being followed. Other tourists were leaving in their motorboats. Nancy wondered if one of them might contain a spy from the ecology company sent out to pursue the pirate. I hope not, the girl detective thought. Nancy observed through binoculars what directions the various craft took. One seemed to stalk the pirate, and Nancy had an uneasy feeling about it. "Do you see anything?" Bess wanted to know. "There's a fast motorboat called the Whisper," Nancy replied. "It seems to be tailing us." "Is that unusual?" George asked. "After all, other people might be heading for Key Biscayne." "Of course," Nancy answered. "It's just that most of the boats have scattered. This one stays right in the wake of our boat." "Uh-oh," Danny murmured. "Maybe they want to find out where we're headed. On the other hand, they wouldn't really have to bother. Anyone can check the boat registry to see who owns the pirate and where we live." "That's great," George said. "They already know who we are, and now they can find out where we're staying." Bess became alarmed. "Let's head for home," she begged. Danny looked at Nancy. "What do you say?" "I'm not ready to leave Crocodile Island just yet. Let's go around it and see what's on the other side. We might pick up a clue." Danny nodded. "Sure. We may even find out if a loose crocodile caused the alarm." "What else would?" George asked. "You girls." Someone might have recognized not Anne, Elizabeth, and Jackie, but Nancy, Bess, and George, and wanted you off the premises. Nancy agreed that it was a possibility. "We're getting to be notorious," she chuckled. Danny followed the shoreline of the quay. The Whisper stayed right behind them, and soon there was no doubt in the girls' minds that the boat was pursuing them. The fast craft finally pulled alongside the pirate. With some apprehension, the young people watched the two men on the Whisper's deck. Both had swarthy complexions and unpleasant faces. One of them shouted, "Get away from this island!" "Why?" Danny asked innocently. "Because it's private property." "The water isn't," George pointed out. "Besides, we're not doing any harm." "We don't want you here," the man insisted, and shook his fist. "Now get lost." "Who are you?" Danny asked. "Why should we listen to you?" "It's none of your business who we are, and if you don't listen, you'll be in trouble." Danny paid no attention to the warning. Instead, he revved up his engine and pulled away from the other craft. Obviously, the two men did not know what to do next, so they followed the young people around the island. Bess had scanned the shoreline through binoculars as unobtrusively as possible. She focused on a metal tube sticking out of the water. It seemed to give off bursts of light, as if it were studded with prisms and mirrors reflecting the rays of the sun. "Hey, see that thing over there? I wonder what it is," she said, excited. The others looked, and George gasped. It could be the periscope of a submarine. "What?" Danny exclaimed. For a moment, he forgot to keep his engine racing. Nancy took the binoculars from Bess and trained them on the strange object. "Is the water deep enough for a submarine to get in?" "Yes," Danny replied. "Notice that the thing is sticking out of one of the channels where the water is green. That means it's deep enough for a small sub. As a matter of fact, during World War II, enemy subs got in here this way. The government had mined all the larger, more important channels to keep them out, but small enemy craft slipped in anyway." "Danny, can you go into the channel?" Nancy asked. "I'd like to see if that really is a periscope." "Sure," Danny said, and changed course. But they soon realized that the men on the Whisper had no intention of letting them go through with their plan. "They're coming closer," George said tensely. Obviously, they don't want us to check that thing out there. Which proves that they have something to do with it, Bess added. Again, the other boat pulled alongside the pirate. You kids think I'm fooling, the skipper shouted. I'm not. If you don't turn around instantly, your boat is going to get rammed, and it'll cost you a pretty penny to have it repaired. But we're leaving the island, Danny pointed out. Just as you told us to. You're going in the wrong direction. Turn back. Danny hesitated. He realized that this time their pursuers meant business. Before he had a chance to pull the wheel around, the Whisper came so close to their skiff that it scraped the bow. All right, Danny cried out. We're leaving. You don't have to damage us. The skipper chuckled evilly. Heh, and don't ever come back. You hear? Bess had turned white and sat frozen in her chair, her hands clamped tightly around its edge. Nancy and George realized that the situation was critical and did not object to Danny's pulling away in the direction the men had indicated. The Whisper followed them for a while, then turned off. Obviously, the men were satisfied that they had chased the intruders away. Wow, Bess said finally. I don't want to see those people ever again. Nancy grinned. I do. They're up to no good, and I'm planning to find out what it is. As the pirate headed toward Key Biscayne, George said, I wonder who those guys are. Let's stop at the Coast Guard office and see in whose name the Whisper is registered. We don't have to do that, Danny said. My dad has a book containing all the information. Unless it's a brand new entry, it should be in there. I wish we could be sure that we saw a periscope, Nancy said, still pondering their strange experience. How do periscopes work? Bess asked. Oh, I know that because we just had it in school, Danny volunteered. You see, the periscope is the eye of the underwater craft. A submarine builder by the name of Simon Lake invented the first good periscope, which was way ahead of the technology and science of his time. He bought a lot of lenses and began to experiment. Not too complicated, George said. Maybe not, but one day he hit upon a lucky combination. He could look down the street and see people walking and wagons rolling through the harbor. He called it an omniscope. It offered enough magnification and clearness of optics, even for night vision, so it was a big success. How long ago was that? George asked. 1902, Danny told her. Before that, they just had makeshift equipment. As soon as they arrived at the Cosgrove house, Danny went to get the boat registry. It was large and heavy. He put it on the dining room table. The girls peered over his shoulder as he checked W for Whisper. Ah, here it is, he said triumphantly. It belongs to two men, Matt Carmen and Breck Tobin. They live in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Do you know who they are? Nancy asked. Nope, never heard of them. I wonder what they're doing down here. They're a long way from home. I'm sure they're in league with the men who run the Crocodile Ecology Company, Nancy said. Maybe they're supposed to guard the place. George spoke up. They got rid of us in a hurry. I hope they don't check up on who owns the pirate and then come here and bother us, Bess said, worried. Danny insisted upon being cheerful about the whole affair. We may be boxed in, but we're not going to let those guys get the better of us, he vowed. Nancy smiled. That's the spirit. The question is, what are we going to do next? When Mr. Cosgrove returned home, the young people told him what had happened and asked his opinion on the case. He thought for a few moments, then said, Frankly, I'm puzzled. We now have a list of suspicious people, but we still have no idea what they're up to. Or how the periscope fits in, Nancy added. Mr. Cosgrove smiled. Are you sure you weren't looking at a marker for a buoy? I don't think so, Nancy replied. But the only way to find out for sure will be to go back and look again. Maybe we shouldn't use the pirate, Danny said. Our enemies are familiar with it. Whenever they see us, they'll come after us. What do you have in mind? His father asked. Perhaps we could ask our friends the Piarulis if we can use their cabin cruiser. He turned to the girls. They dock right next to us, and if they're not using the Samson, I'm sure they'll let us have it. It's enclosed, too, which would help. Those men couldn't identify us. That's a good idea, Mr. Cosgrove agreed. I'll call them and ask. He went to the telephone and returned a few minutes later. Mr. Piarulli said you can have his boat tomorrow. Unfortunately, their son and his wife are taking it up north the following day. Danny grinned. One day is better than none. True, George agreed. But what do we do after that? Play it by ear, Danny said with a grin. We'll take things as they come. Let's leave early in the morning. The tide should be just right. Do you think it's necessary for all of us to go? Bess asked. Mrs. Cosgrove promised to show me how to make lemon nut cake. I don't want to pass up the opportunity to enlarge my knowledge of recipes. If you'd rather cook than be a detective, you're welcome to stay home, George said. Bess could not stand her cousin's condescending tone. On second thought, I'll postpone my culinary education, she decided. Bess was relieved, however, when the plans changed abruptly later that evening. The Cosgroves and their guests were seated in the living room, discussing the mystery. The visitors were trying to figure out the connection between the men on Crocodile Island and the two from Connecticut when the telephone rang. Mr. Cosgrove answered, then said, Nancy, there's a long-distance call for you. End of chapter 5.